What is your glitch in the matrix story? This is the first glitch I've experienced. So I was at my friend's house the other day and we got some drinks from the kitchen and then went up to his room to play some video games. He put his glass of water on his bookshelf, then turned round to shut his door. In doing so, he knocked over the full glass of water and it went all over the floor. My friend was pretty pissed as it got over quite a few of his books as well. So we went downstairs to get some kitchen towels and came back up like 30 seconds later. When we opened his door, we noticed that the wet patch on the floor was gone, so we felt it and it was bone dry. His books that got wet were dry too, and we couldn't find the glass that we'd left on the floor either. It was then that we looked up and saw a full glass of water sitting on his bookshelf. No one could have put it there as we were home alone at the time. When I read things like this, I wonder how often these glitch experiences have happened throughout human history. Many of these experiences have been chalked up to trickster demons, time slips, wormholes and aliens. Thanks to the internet, these occurrences can be well documented. Plot holes in our understanding of linear physical reality are revealed. So, my life is basically one big glitch in the matrix, so I have an abundance of stories I can share, and I've just now worked up the effort to write some out for you guys. My dad works away often, and he was telling me a story about how he got back to his hotel after work one day and tried to park his car in his usual spot in the underground parking. His spot was taken, so he took a spot which was quite close to his usual one. He got out of the car and went to the elevator to go up to his room for his usual afternoon TV binge, and then followed by the inevitable nap. He said the TV went off as well as all the lights, so he assumed there was a power outage and thought to just go to bed. He woke up in the morning to go to work but couldn't find his car. He looked everywhere and found it on the opposite side of the parking lot. Confused, he went to reception and told them someone had moved his car and it definitely wasn't him. Admin told him that they don't move customer cars and that they will have a look at the CCTV footage. What follows on the footage is my dad getting back from work, parking the car, going up the elevator, and a few hours later when the power goes off, you can see the camera flicker from the power going off. In that short flicker of the camera going on and off for a few seconds, my dad's car appears on the other side of the parking lot when the cameras came back on. The person in reception and my dad were speechless. He called me up shortly after to tell me the story is, for once, instead of crazy stuff like that happening to me, it's happening for him for once. Okay. This is kind of a weird incident, but when I was in 6th grade, my best friend and I were playing catch in my house and there was no one in the room but us. The lights were flickering but we didn't really give any attention to them because it was very normal. As I was throwing the ball towards her, it suddenly stopped in the middle of the air. We had no idea what was going on, and after like 5 seconds it dropped on the ground. Without saying anything to each other, we just ran. She ran out of the house and I ran to my mother. Obviously, no one took us seriously, but we knew it was real. Now we are in college but we still don't know what happened. I thought it was probably a ghost or something, but I don't know. My best friend Lucy's father had a severe brain aneurysm just before Christmas this past year. He ended up in a coma and just woke up about 13 days ago. Lucy and her family were so excited that he woke up fairly healthy and chipper considering the circumstances. However, they quickly discovered he thinks it's 2010. Lucy and I are both 23. In 2010, we were 13. Lucy was a dancer as a kid. She stopped dancing when we finished high school, and one of her dad's first questions was what happened. We were just at Lucy's recital. Everyone assumed that he was just delirious at first, but it became obvious that he doesn't remember anything from the last decade. Lucy has an older brother who within the last 10 years has gotten married and had a child of his own. Their dad does not recognize her brother's wife, as they had not met prior to 2010, and had no idea that he was a grandpa. It was heartbreaking listening to her tell me this. Lucy and her brother are 6 years apart. In between those 6 years, before Lucy was born, their parents had a baby that lived for only 5 weeks in the NICU. The craziest part of this whole thing is that her dad doesn't know they lost that baby, and he has memories of his dead child's whole life. He asked where Duncan was, and they sadly had to tell him, "Dad, remember Duncan died when he was a baby?" Lucy's dad was completely dumbfounded. He has protested that Duncan played hockey, loved dinosaurs, was doing a co-op for the military, and he wanted to be a firefighter when he finished high school. None of these memories lined up with Lucy's older, living, brother, so they ruled out the possibility he was mixing the two sons up. He remembers raising Duncan from birth to a 17-year-old boy, which is how old Duncan would have been in 2010 if he didn't die in infancy. He knew Duncan's actual birthday and told everyone that he went with Duncan to buy his first used car that day. He has fabricated memories of his dead son during a time that he remembers everything else perfectly. All his other memories from 1961 when he was born, to 2010 are crystal clear and accurate. But this detail of remembering a whole life that never had the chance to exist is freaking everyone out. He is literally grieving a son right now that he already grieved 27 years ago when he actually died. He's devastated. We're wondering if this is some supernatural thing. As in, did baby Duncan give his dad memories during a time when his brain was not with the current world? Has anyone else ever heard of anything like this? An experience I absolutely cannot explain. Living in the mountains of California at the time, one night I was smoking a little weed at a friend of a friend's property where a few random people lived. I was feeling really anxious. My body was physically vibrating/jittering, so I went for a walk. As I walked by this woman's cabin, she came out and said hi, and asked if I wanted to drink some tea and chat. She was really into Reiki, crystals, and all that other junk science. I'm a physicist, so extremely skeptical. She asked what I was up to just wandering around, and I told her I was anxious. She offered to do some Reiki on me to relieve the stress. I thought, whatever couldn't hurt. She stood behind me and started barely touching my back, waving her hands around like she's a shitty magician. After about 3 minutes, I felt all the anxious energy fall from my body like turning off a light switch, and I felt completely relaxed. She immediately exclaimed, "Wow! Did you feel that?" I looked at her, and she had this crazy intense look on her face like she just absorbed all the jittery energy I was feeling. She sat down in front of me, then spent the next 30 minutes telling me things that were popping randomly into her mind. It ranged from extremely specific and technical details of some research I was working on, to questions about sadness and this very obscure valley in the Sierra Mountains where I had nearly committed suicide the year before. I hadn't told a soul about that. It is such a remote place. It floored me that she brought the name up out of nothing. She went on and on, things I've never told anyone. Things that were so extremely specific it was no comparison to mediums who say generic things to coax you into believing their lies. She then gave me a crystal and asked me to meditate while holding it. For a moment, I could feel the crystal lattice of rock, the subatomic structure that I've seen many times in physics textbooks. It was a deeply moving feeling and experience of oneness with this stone. I opened my eyes, and she immediately asked me if I had felt that exact thing I just described. A strange question given the specificity of the words she used to describe the visualization I just had. 15 years later I occasionally think about that night. I haven't seen this woman since, but I have thought about looking her up to ask her how she did that. I still don't believe in Reiki or any of that pseudoscience, but I definitely do have the feeling that the universe is a lot more complicated and connected than I previously thought. What I am about to say will seem unreal, and I still have doubts about what I saw because the probability that this actually happened is very slim, but, paradoxically, I know what I saw. It happened a few years ago. I was on the school bus heading home after school. All of a sudden, the bus took a completely new route. I was sitting on the left, and was just near the window. I looked and I saw on the same street a bus that looked really old going the other way. At some point, my window was facing one of the windows of the old bus and I saw my mom. Except she was my age and wearing what seemed to be a white uniform. We looked at each other with complete shock, as if she knew exactly who I was. We didn't break eye contact the whole time our buses were crossing paths. As soon as I arrived home, I went to look at my mom's old photo albums. I stumbled across a picture of my mom, with the exact same haircut as my young mom, wearing that same white uniform. I have no idea how to explain this, and this is why I think I witnessed a glitch in the matrix. This happened a few years ago. I had come home for Christmas break, along with a few family members that were visiting for the celebrations. There were 12 to 14 of us, and we were all staying at my folks'. I should tell that my family makes up for a pretty interesting and verbose crowd, all professionals with rather successful careers in different fields. There are a couple of MDs, lawyers, psychologists, engineers, and musicians. We would spend our days and nights catching up, playing games and having these lavish meals where conversation, music, and wine flowed in free form. I keep fond memories of the event, albeit for one micro episode. It was the smallest thing. Somebody bought a charades game one afternoon, and we proceeded to play. Teams were formed, the game was on. At first, it was fun, then it got more competitive. Yelling and distraction techniques ensued until the thing happened. It was my turn to guess, and my uncle, the neurologist, was to try his best at representing a word with his body. He took a random card out of the deck, paused for a few seconds and then punched the clock to begin his impersonation. However, he couldn't even try. A split second after punching the clock, I felt an urge, a certainty, a word, pushing to get out of my mouth. I screamed "Cumbres" at the top of my lungs. Everyone stood in silence. My uncle took a long, deep look at me and smiled with irony. "You saw the card," he said. "This one doesn't count." I was stupefied. "No way," I said. I was standing on the opposite side of a long table, and everyone was looking. I was as baffled as him. I went on to say that I didn't saw the card, that it was impossible for my position. "You knew the words in the deck," he insisted. I absolutely didn't, of course. The game had been unboxed for the occasion, and I never play charades. I couldn't explain what happened either. I don't know what drove me to say a word I never use, or knew, for what matters, but I still wonder about it every once in a while. Good times. I had a sleepover with a friend. I'm a dreamer, I dream every night, always have. This night when my friend slept over, we went to sleep and it felt like I just blinked, opened my eyes, and it was morning. It was the strangest feeling because I didn't lose my train of thought at the moment. I was thinking about the movie we had watched. I blinked, still thinking about the movie, but when I opened my eyes it was morning. I felt like something was off, so I asked my friend if she had a good night and she replied with "I'm still tired." It feels like I just closed my eyes for a second. At that moment I was internally freaked out cause I felt the same exact thing. I kept it to myself cause I didn't want to sound crazy, but I'm just curious if anyone else has ever had an experience where they blink and lose hours of time just to open your eyes and it is 8+ hours later. I am sorry if this is the wrong place to post this. Mandela Effect doesn't allow personal stories, only stuff with proof. This is gonna be long. This Wednesday, February 5th, on the way to work I went to my usual gas station. I go there every day, 5 days a week. I go in and everything is different. All new drink stations have been installed and the food area is completely redone. None of this was different Tuesday morning and I couldn't believe that they'd redone a gas station in one night. I then go outside and see that 2 gas pumps are completely gone and there are mulch bags stacked taking up all the space. None of this was there the day before. I then leave and head to work and somehow turn on the wrong street and get lost. I've been driving these neighborhoods for months, and suddenly I'm lost trying to find my job. I get to work a few minutes later and I'm panicking. I know it's silly, but I've always feared changing timelines. My fiancé and I have a timeline safe word, so we know we are together. I call and ask him and he has no idea what I'm talking about. We just talked about it at the end of January and we've had it established for a while. I've even woken him up at night and asked him after having a nightmare and he's known. But now he has no idea what I'm talking about. Then the girls start coming downstairs. I work in an addictions group home, and one girl keeps saying how confused she is and how nothing makes sense today. Later in the day, another kept saying all she wanted to do was cry and she had no idea why. Then while running errands I go down the same street I always do and suddenly there are 4 houses gone and a grove of trees planted. I've never seen them before and really started freaking. They are next to a building my family owned for the last 20 years. I know the whole neighborhood. My final straw was calling my mom today. She said my sister was going out tonight with her friend Jenna. I have known Jenna since 2003. I asked how much longer until Jenna has her baby. My mom goes silent and asks what the heck I'm talking about. She says she's never been pregnant. I look her up online, nothing. I asked my sister just a half hour ago and she laughs in my face and says Jenna is infertile and will never have kids. I literally remember the day my sister told me she was pregnant. She told me to guess who and Jenna was my third guess. What the hell is happening to my life? Edit update. I really appreciate all the support and kind words people have had for me. This whole experience has been very scary for me. As for a few questions people have had, it's getting hard to keep up. I'm going to answer them here. I have already taken an extensive online schizophrenia test on Friday night. It said that I'm fine and a very low probability of it. As for CO2 poisoning, I have no gas in my home or the home I work in. Everything is electric. I opened up to my fiancé and had him read this. He knew it had happened but didn't know how upset I was. I asked him if I had shown any signs of mental instability or Alzheimer's. I'm only 25 and he said I've never shown any signs and only some mild anxiety when things get crazy. Lastly, the safe word and things leading up to the day. We created the safe word mostly as a joke after I read the Berenstain Bears theory and I had a really weird day at my old job. It became more used when I'd have nightmares and when I made jokes. The day before was a normal Tuesday. Wake up, work, home, eat, sleep. The only strange thing about the day was that I thought I'd heard a scream or yell as I was falling asleep. I blew it off and still kind of blow it off as some sort of sleep paralysis or dreamy moment. So I'll start by saying I'm not sure if this is the right sub. And I know it's nowhere near as epic as many stories on here. But whilst reading this sub, it made me think of my nan. So I had to share. So this happened to my nan all the time. Usually small things. Last week I was driving my son to school and she said, "Make sure you shut the door. He's going to shut his finger in it." So I shut the car door and sparked it up to her being old. 20 minutes later the school phoned to say he'd shut his thumb in the hinge of the fire door, and later at A&D we found out he'd broken his thumb joint. She literally does it all the time, with a 75 to 80% success rate. But this is my favorite one. My nan was a post-war baby. Born in London in 1945, she lived in the basement of a 4-story Victorian house. Her mother's whole family had been killed by a bomb whilst her mother had been at the GP surgery finding out she was pregnant with my nan. Her father was in army prison until she was 6, so she and her mum had a tough life. Anyway, from the age of about 4 she always had this dream. The dream would be her looking out of a window and seeing miles and miles of fields and pine trees. As a kid she always thought this was the most beautiful scene she'd ever seen, but couldn't brush off the feeling of dread and heartbreak that accompanied the dream. Later the dream got more detailed, and eventually she got the letters K135. She had the dream at least 6 times. Always the same. She said the last time she had this dream, she was sitting in the car with my granddad. She was only 16, and zoned out, had the whole dream and zoned back in, and only 20 seconds had passed. The last time, she tried to touch the window. Her hand came into the frame, but it wasn't the hand of a 16-year-old, it was older, drier and more wrinkled. She never really brushed the dream off, to be honest. She had K135 written in the kitchen door frame for my entire life and probably years before I was born also. She always told me of the dream, but I always thought it was nothing. She kept trying to explain how she never fell asleep. It felt like a time lapse, not a dream, and she always wanted to know where the view was. In 2006, my parents found out they were expecting their 6th child. She was an accident lol, and they'd need to move house to fit us all. In May 2006, Kay was born. January 2007, my parents moved house, and my grandparents helped us get moved in. My granddad, only aged 63, helped with all the heavy lifting, painting, etc. whilst my nan watched us kids. 4 weeks later my nan went to visit the completed house, and my granddad was super excited to take her to visit my baby sister Kay's room. He'd worked really hard, building her furniture, painting her walls, installing her light fittings. But my nan didn't see all his hard work. All she saw was a massive K painted above the window frame, and the view she'd seen so many times since she was a kid. She knew something horrid was going to happen. She told us all, and we just did the standard "yeah okay." 4 weeks later, my granddad was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. They'd been married 43 years. No one could believe it. He deteriorated, fast. About 6 weeks later, my nan phoned a taxi firm to get a taxi to visit my granddad, as she had every day since his diagnosis. It was an automated message. "Thank you for calling taxis. If you would like a taxi from your home address of please press 1. Presses 1. Thank you for using taxis. Your booking reference is 135. Your taxi will be dispatched shortly." That was the last time she saw my granddad alive. She said she knew before she got there. And she was glad she got to say goodbye properly. She said she'd spent 60 years preparing for this moment and she doesn't think she'd have coped otherwise. A week later, her and my mum went to sign the death certificate. When they come home my little sister asked my nan to come and play in her bedroom. She went upstairs and broke down in front of the window. She reached out and touched the glass, and she swears to this day, her hand was that of a teenager. Her wedding wasn't present, and it's been on her finger for 43 years at this point. There wasn't a wrinkle in sight and she blinked and it was back to normal. She always tells this story. She has had lots of glitches. I'll make another post another day if I have time, but this is definitely the most prolific one she's had. I was 17 at the time. My dad and I had just finished our fishing trip and it was almost midnight, mid-fall. When I was about to get in the car he told me that he did not want me to sit in the front seat on the ride home. We argued about it for about 5 minutes and he did not give any good reason why he did not want me to. I gave up and got in the back seat. It was pitch black outside. When we had been driving on the main road for about 2 minutes we saw a car driving in our lane. Right as we were about to collide my dad swerved into the other lane and so did the car in front of us. I heard my dad say I knew it at the very last second and then I blacked out. I woke up when the police showed up at the scene. They helped me out of the car. I was barely conscious and don't remember much after that. The only thing that is still a crystal clear memory is that I saw my dad, sitting in the car waving at me with tears in his eyes. When I later asked where my dad was, I was told that he had flown out of the car window and landed only a few feet from the car and passed away later in the ambulance. I was told the man we crashed with died on impact and also had a 17-year-old daughter in the back seat who survived. I still can't believe that this really happened. This was 6 years ago.